In the Chinese Grand Prix sprint qualifying session, the four-time Formula One champion finished way off the pace, openly describing a car lacking grip and balance. Before we continue, I'd like to read your comments. Do you think Red Bull is starting to lose technical control to Mercedes and McLaren? Because the big question now is this: what's really going on with the RB22, and why can't Verstappen make it work in Shanghai? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more analysis like this. In this analysis, we'll break down what happened in the Chinese Grand Prix sprint qualifying, why Verstappen finished so far off the pace, and what this reveals about the true state of the RB22 this season. Because what we saw on Friday in Shanghai wasn't just an off day. It could be the sign of a much deeper technical problem. The Shanghai weekend started with worrying signs for Red Bull right from the start. In the only free practice session, Max Verstappen finished in 8th position, a considerable distance behind the fastest time set by George Russell. For a driver accustomed to extracting performance, even in challenging conditions, that result already set off alarm bells in the team garage. From the first few laps, Verstappen began reporting over the radio a very clear feeling of a lack of grip and a car balance completely out of its sweet spot, something that on a technical circuit like China can quickly become a structural problem for the entire weekend. The track Shanghai is not a circuit that forgives aerodynamic balance errors. The very long opening corner demands continuous stability at both the front and rear for several seconds, which tests both downforce and the management of the front left tire. When a car doesn't generate enough lateral downforce in that area, the driver loses time consistently throughout the corner, and more importantly, loses confidence in the car to attack for the rest of the lap. That's exactly what Verstappen described when he climbed out of the car, insisting that he was simply losing too much time in the long corners. As Friday progressed, the Red Bull engineers tried to fine-tune the setup to find a more stable performance window, but the RB22 proved very sensitive to even small changes in configuration. The car looked competitive in the straights, with a fairly solid top speed thanks to its aggressive integration between chassis and power unit, but the moment they reached the sustained downforce zones, performance noticeably dropped off. This left Verstappen in an uncomfortable position, forced to choose between attacking on the curve, risking the stability of the car, or maintaining control, sacrificing time per lap. When sprint qualifying began in Shanghai, it became clear that the problems Verstappen had reported in practice had not been resolved. From the very first phase of the session, the Dutchman struggled to find a clean lap and, above all, to generate sufficient temperature and grip on the tires in the most demanding sections of the circuit. He finished SQ1 in 11th position, a result that already reflected the RB22's lack of responsiveness to the track pace. While other teams were improving their times with each attempt, the Red Bull seemed stuck, unable to gain the necessary tenths of a second in the sectors where the Milton Keynes team usually made the difference. The second phase confirmed that the problem was not circumstantial. Verstappen managed to move up the order, but he did so without showing any real improvement in performance compared to his direct rivals. In this part of the session, one of the most revealing moments of the day occurred when the driver ran wide at the final corner of the circuit, a clear sign that he was pushing the car beyond a limit that simply wasn't stable. These kinds of errors are not typical of Verstappen's driving style when he has complete confidence in the rear of the car. So many engineers and analysts interpreted this off-track excursion as a direct indication that the car's balance was far from ideal. When Q3 arrived, the gap to the fastest cars of the day became even more apparent. Verstappen ultimately finished in 8th position, while the fastest time of the session set a benchmark that the RB22 couldn't even come close to matching. The gap to the leader reached approximately 1.7 seconds in the final stages of sprint qualifying, a huge margin in modern Formula One, and especially surprising for a driver who has dominated qualifying in recent years. The most worrying thing for the team was not just the absolute difference, but the fact that this gap was increasing as the track improved and the other cars found more performance. To understand why Verstappen was so frustrated in Shanghai, we need to look beyond the results of a single session and analyze the technical characteristics of the RB22. The main problem doesn't seem to be simply a lack of outright speed, but something more complex related to the car's operating window. In other words, the car can be fast when everything is perfectly aligned, but when conditions change even slightly, performance drops off sharply. This explains why the team has had weekends where the car seems competitive and others where it becomes extremely difficult to drive, something even Verstappen has described as unpredictable behavior. One of the key factors is how the RB22 interacts with the tires and sustained downforce in corners. Shanghai is a circuit that severely punishes any imbalance between the front and rear axles, especially in the long corners where the car must maintain stability for several seconds. If the rear end loses grip or the balance shifts even slightly, the driver starts to slide more than necessary, which not only costs time but also rapidly deteriorates the tires. Verstappen explained precisely this when discussing the enormous amount of time he was losing in the corners, something that doesn't usually happen when a Red Bull is within its ideal performance window. Added to this is another important technical element that is part of the RB22 concept. The car uses an advanced active aerodynamics system combined with very aggressive energy management of the hybrid power unit. On paper, this combination allows for maximizing straight line speed and optimizing downforce depending on the sector of the circuit. However, it also introduces enormous complexity to the car's setup because the balance between aerodynamics, power delivery, and tire behavior has to be perfectly synchronized. If one of these elements doesn't align with the others at the right moment, the car's character can change just as the driver is mid-corner, creating a feeling of instability at the limit. The reaction within Red Bull after sprint qualifying was a mixture of self-criticism, concern, and an urgent search for answers. In the team garage, there was a clear feeling that the performance shown fell far short of the expectations they had for the Chinese Grand Prix. Internally, the engineers knew the car had potential, but they also acknowledged that they hadn't managed to get the RB22 into its optimal operating window. This recognition even led to team members conveying apologies to Verstappen for the car's performance during the sprint session, admitting that the overall balance of the car was far from what the driver needed to attack the circuit with confidence. For a team that has dominated much of the recent Formula One era, this type of situation presents both a technical and psychological challenge. Red Bull is accustomed to finding solutions quickly between sessions, tweaking setup details that typically put the car back in contention for pole position or victory. However, in this case, the feeling within the team was different because the problem seemed deeper than a simple change to the front wing or a suspension tweak. The engineers began reviewing data related to energy management, tire behavior, and the interaction of the active aerodynamic system to try to understand why the car was reacting so erratically in Shanghai's long corners. As for Verstappen, his reaction was direct and blunt, something that often happens when the Dutchman feels the car isn't responding to what he needs on track. After the session, he spoke openly about a disastrous day in terms of pace and explained that the car simply lacked grip and balance in the corners. The most striking comment, which resonated throughout the paddock, was when he admitted he wasn't even sure what changes could be made to find time before the next competitive session. This type of comment is unusual for a driver who normally exudes confidence in the team's ability to quickly rectify problems. Looking ahead to qualifying, the scenario for Red Bull appears considerably more complex than the team anticipated at the start of the weekend. The deficit seen in sprint qualifying wasn't a minor difference that could be easily remedied with a slight wing adjustment or a minor suspension change. When a car is more than a second off the fastest time in a short qualifying format, it usually indicates a problem with how the car generates grip throughout the lap. For this reason, the team's immediate objective will likely be to find a setup that allows the RB22 to be more predictable in corners, even if it means sacrificing some top speed on Shanghai's long straight. If Red Bull can improve the car's stability, Verstappen still has room to make up ground in qualifying. The Dutchman has demonstrated many times that, when the car responds even minimally to his inputs, he can extract time even in challenging conditions. However, the real challenge will be getting the RB22 into the correct operating window for the tires, something that appears to have been one of the biggest issues on Friday. If the engineers can stabilize the rear end and build more confidence in the long corners of the first sector, the car could potentially get back close to the times of the teams that topped sprint qualifying. Looking ahead to the race, the situation could change slightly due to the nature of long runs. Traditionally, Red Bull cars tend to show more consistent race pace than in qualifying, especially when Verstappen can manage tire wear and maintain a steady pace over several consecutive laps. However, Shanghai is a particularly demanding circuit on tires, and if the grip issue we saw on Friday persists, the RB22 could also suffer from tire degradation, something Verstappen has already mentioned in other recent races this season. In that scenario, the team's strategic objective could quickly shift to limiting damage and securing a good number of points instead of directly fighting for victory. What we saw in the Chinese Grand Prix sprint qualifying wasn't just a bad session for Max Verstappen. It was a clear sign that Red Bull is facing one of its most uncomfortable weekends in recent years. A car lacking grip in the long corners, a difficult balance to manage, and a driver who normally dominates any situation openly stating that he can't find answers. When all these pieces come together, the problem ceases to be a simple setup issue and begins to look like something deeper within the RB22's behavior. Even so, in Formula One, nothing is truly decided until the race is over. Red Bull remains one of the most efficient teams in the paddock when it comes to reacting under pressure, and Verstappen has shown many times that he can turn a difficult weekend into an unexpected comeback. If the team can understand what's causing this loss of grip and get the car back within its optimal operating window, there's still a chance the Dutchman could recover ground and be back in contention for top positions. That's why qualifying and the race in China won't just determine the outcome of a Grand Prix. They could reveal something much more significant about the true balance of power in this Formula One season. And now I want to know your opinion. Do you think Red Bull will find the solution over the weekend, or are we seeing the start of a much more complicated battle for Verstappen this year? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.